In recent years, a lot of attention has been given to The Boys and its standout character, Homelander. Despite his actions in the series, many of which are extremely violent, manipulative, or just straight up downright disturbing, Homelander remains one of the most talked about characters in modern television. It's a dynamic that raises an interesting question. What exactly makes him such a compelling villain? Why him specifically? We explore that question and more in today's video. So let's start with the basics. Homelander represents an interesting blend of traits. On one hand, he's the picture of an ideal superhero. He's powerful, charismatic, and the public sees him as a symbol of hope, at least in his public persona. But on the other, he's deeply flawed, driven by insecurity, and often behaves in ways that are destructive to himself, but mostly to others around him. What makes Homelander stand out is that he feels like a character who could exist if someone like Superman were real. If someone had that much power, combined with the unstable personality and deep need for validation. It's not hard to imagine that they might behave the way that Homelander does. Take the average celebrity on the surface. They have a personality that's carefully crafted to maintain their popularity, but often we find out that sometimes the facade that they put up was really shielding us from who they really are. Maybe they aren't as pleasant as their public persona shows, and sometimes maybe they were hiding something that was actually pretty horrifying. This is a big part of why people gravitate towards characters like Homelander. They aren't just cartoonish villains who exist solely to give the hero someone to fight, like a cardboard cutout that has no other personality other than being a hand-wringing villain. They feel like fully formed people, with motivations, fears, and desires that feel grounded in some version of reality, even if their actions are extreme and sometimes their motivations to do evil are somewhat understandable. Homelander, for instance, is driven by the need to be loved. That constant pursuit of approval mixed with the unchecked power creates a character who's both dangerous and unpredictable. When he circles a character, you can see in scenes that he plays around with them for no other reason than because he enjoys doing it. When you compare this to the way that villains are often written in superhero stories, the difference becomes quite clear. There are certainly memorable villain characters like Thanos, Killmonger, or Loki that stand out, but many others tend to feel more like plot devices. Villains like Malekith in Thor: The Dark World or Ronan the Accuser in the Guardians of the Galaxy don't really have much in the way of depth. Their motivations are usually simple: power, destruction, and revenge. They usually don't leave a lasting impression beyond the movie that they appear in. Homelander's character is much more of a long-term presence. He's not just the antagonist in one season, he's central to the entire story of The Boys. Opposite of Huey, Butcher, and the rest of the Boys, Homelander is also a main character. Watching his character evolve over time and seeing how his insecurities and manipulative tendencies impact the world around him gives the audience a deeper understanding of what makes him horribly dangerous. This idea of the compelling villain isn't really new. Looking back at earlier examples of prestige television like The Sopranos or The Wire, or more recently Breaking Bad, we can see how complex, morally ambiguous characters become central to the storytelling. Tony Soprano, for example, is a criminal, but the show spends a lot of time exploring his personal struggles and his time as a crime boss. It's the same with characters like Stringer Bell or Avon Barksdale in The Wire, or Walter White, who started the show as a neutral figure but became the biggest monster at the end of the series. These are people who do terrible things, but the audience gets a chance to see their perspective and their goals, which humanizes them from the mustache-twirling dastardly villains of yesterday to everyday terrifying people who you could realistically run into on your way to the bank or eating next to at a restaurant. In a similar way, Homelander is not just a symbol of evil. He's a character with a specific worldview, shaped by his upbringing as a science experiment, being locked in a lab surrounded by scientists who didn't really treat him like a human being, ultimately turning him into this cold, unfeeling soup with a god complex.
No god. The only man in the sky is me.
This complexity is what makes him feel real, even if his actions are extreme, which helps fuel his ultimate plan that we see him pull off in The Boys Season 4. If you haven't noticed, he took over the United States to appoint supes as the dominant class, not just as equals to regular humans, even though they were seen as elevated with their positions in Vought anyway, so taking this extra power grab to establish supes as the dominant race is a bit of subtext the show wants you to read in between the lines to understand, if you didn't catch the times that they just outright tell you. That's Homelander's main goal, and day by day, it's becoming more scarily realistic that his plan is something that certain sections of the population actually want. He isn't Lex Luthor in the original Superman trying to sink California to turn some of his investments into prime beachfront property, where his plan is admittedly silly, but looking back, probably some members of society would do today if given the chance. We've also seen this approach work in film. Take Thanos in the Avengers movies. He's not just a villain who wants to destroy life. He believes he's saving it by wiping out half of all life in the universe. His motivations are understandable in a way, even if they are deeply flawed. That sense of a villain who believes that they're the hero of their own story often makes characters more engaging. It also helped that every time he opened his mouth, he would utter an iconic line. Or consider Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight. The character is different in that he doesn't have a clear ideology. He's more about chaos for its own sake. But what makes him effective is that unpredictability. You never know what he's gonna do next. That keeps the audience on edge. Homelander shares some of these traits. He's unpredictable, sometimes calm and controlled, but other times violent and impulsive. He's not driven by clear ideology like Thanos. But he does have a personal mission, to be loved and to have Supes control the world and to be a god amongst men, where he places Supes as above normal humans. That's his goal, and he's actively doing it. Another aspect worth mentioning is the role of long-form storytelling in shaping the audience reaction to characters like Homelander. In a movie, a villain might only have 2 hours to make an impression, and maybe they get an appearance in a sequel. But in a show like The Boys, Homelander has multiple seasons to evolve, to become more complex, and to reveal new aspects of his character. That extended screen time allows for deeper explorations of his personality. It also gives the audience more time to develop a connection with him, even if it's a negative one. But it's also worth noting that in modern television, audiences have become more comfortable with morally complex characters. In earlier eras of TV, villains were often clearly defined, with little room for ambiguity. Think your bad guys of the week on early TV shows. But in today's shows, whether it's The Boys, Game of Thrones, or The Last of Us, there's a greater interest in exploring characters who don't neatly fit into categories of good or evil. So when you see people online talking about how much they like Homelander, it's often less about endorsing his actions and more about appreciating the depth of the character. Of course, no one sane actually supports what he's doing, unless you're on certain sections of the internet. But with all the memes you see of people making of him, just shows that he has sticking power with certain parts of the audience. That also has to do with how great Anthony Starr is as an actor, because he can pull off psychopath with nothing behind the eyes so well it's insane. In the end, the most effective villains tend to be the ones who stick with you after the story is over. Whether it's Homelander, Thanos, or the Joker, these characters linger in the mind because they aren't just obstacles for the heroes to beat in their own stories. They're reflections of deeper themes and questions within the story itself. That's their real purpose as villains. They also represent ideas that the main character has to face. Thanos being the self-appointed savior of the universe and using the stones to destroy half of all life, that's what makes them stand out, and it's why characters like Homelander stick out to us. And more specifically, meme culture. Because at the end of it, when people like popular things, people will make memes of it, and each feeds into the other. But those are just my thoughts on this. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to post up your hashtag mailbag questions in the comments. See you guys next time.
I'm the Homelander.